Testing 1, 2, 3. It's probably not the best intro, doing that as if it's off air when it's really on. But I'm waiting for it to. There we go! Live. Okay. Let's check the audio, even though I can see it's reading it. Ooh, live. Yeah. All right. So, um, this video of Gary's. Oh, I forgot. Did I put the link in the thing? Yes, I did. Okay. Um, decided that I'm going to try to be pleasant, and I'll explain that. Now, trying to be not pleasant, I don't think that's necessarily in my, but to not get upset. Let's just put it that way. Um, so the reason I didn't continue with my part in Gary in trying to re-engage with Gary on science, um, and even that re-engagement was more I talked about Gary, but I already was like, I can't talk about this directly. But I challenged him to learn some words. He calls that word games. And in this video over here, don't knock on Gary's tank. That's cruelty to animals. And the noise is 10 times amplified in there. And there it's like boom, 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 boom. Don't do that. See, that's kind of a word game. But you call my use of these terms, locality and realism, my explanation of them, you call that a word game again. And so it's like, well, I didn't watch the whole video because I told you, and I have a policy now that feels very, it's not a policy like I'm going to remember. It's like, no, this is just how I feel. It comes naturally because, like, you've said in your videos things that I know you know otherwise about my positions, how I would put them, or even how they could be put in your words more honestly. And I've realized that, instead of interpreting that just as some sort of anxiety reaction that you have in the middle of your thoughts, that, you have this channel, you would like your ideas to be spread, and so it's a better assumption that, it's propagandistic, and then you're projecting on me that I'm lying, that I'm playing word games. No, the word locality and realism are words that, like, you can either have a local or a real or a system that wants both or that believes in neither. Or you can even say those words don't really apply. Here's the problems with their definitions. But they're more or less carefully and clearly defined. So if you either decompose and deconstruct, reject the definition, or you can apply them to your system, it tells the rest of us a lot about your system. And you call that word games. Um, and yet you make up a word like ton. Now I like that word. I think it's one of the diamonds in the rough of your system. Not entirely novel. I'd thought of that as well, but I hadn't really started tokenizing the word with regular use. But it was clear in the language from, like graviton. What would that mean? These are the time. Actually, I meant to look up the etymology of this and I forgot. Um, but I like that. That's not exactly, that's a novel use, new use of a word um, that you've only, partially defined. The reason it's clear, the meaning of it, if it is at all, which your meaning of it isn't necessarily, it isn't necessarily not clear, but I mean the general part that's clear is that it's a little particle, it's a little thing, and also maybe that it's shooting along photon-like, an electron. Um, so it seems a little bit hypocritical. And I realized that partly, I've always had this thing that, I don't really consider someone a friend. I don't consider them an enemy, but there's other relationships like colleagues or, um, don't know what hobbyists, um, when you're discussing things online or really anything online, if somebody says they have a long distance relationship, that's a real relationship, unless have you ever met once yet? Because if you haven't, that's the consummation of things as personal as friendship. On the other hand, I many times have gotten friendships, and even though in my mind I'm like, well, it doesn't really count as a friendship yet, it's not like I'd stab them in the back. I definitely feel as a friend of these people, and as this, the internet world becomes more and more common and ubiquitous, I've realized, well, that's a bit of a bias on my part. Of course, you could be friends online, and yet, really, there's a threshold of you just don't know, I feel, until you can meet someone in person. And I have many times met people, starting back in high school. I met a guy on a bulletin board discussion forum, like what we do, and he's talking about his physics teacher, and I'm like, that sounds like my physics teacher. It turns out we went to the same high school. A good friend. And it's happened many, many times. And at the point that I meet the person in real life, then all the feelings I might have of friendship, or I suppose other feelings, because it's happened both ways since I went to the first yearly Coast convention, the only yearly Coast convention. It was Netroots Nation now, and had mixed relationships with people from that board. So when you and I met in person, that meant it was eligible in my mind to think of you as a friend. And the thing is, a lot of shit I put up with people online because of this hobby and the colleague attitude that I have towards street philosophy, like the Street Academy. This is like learning the philosophy of the streets. People always talk about that as though it's how to steal and rob, and that's part of it. But it's also the philosophy of what people really think out in the wild, in the jungle. Street philosophy is a good thing. It's the philosophy of the 99%, right? And it's varied. It's not one attitude, of course. That's obviously not. Our hobby is to have these disagreements. And to have that, you want to talk about things with people you disagree with, and things should be able to get heated. And I like to put it up and enjoy a conversation where you don't have to watch yourself in that regard, but I don't have to watch myself to avoid certain kinds of character assassination. And I think you might be projecting with your word game accusation in my case. I think I've always been very fair and very careful if I try to introduce a term, including all these terms that, spiritual materiality, material subjectivity. I was just seeing a video because I'm looking up, I got like 8 solipsism videos from the last 6 years that I'm going to use for my contribution to you guys' uninformed contemplations in that regard. And so I don't want to put up with certain kinds of things. So part of this is actually maybe that the restriction I put on friends, some of it isn't just for friends, it's also for conversations. Where I have to draw the line is being told that I'm not just trying to be as straightforward as I can be. Now, if some of my ideas are slippery, it's not because I'm designing them on purpose to be slippery per se. Maybe I like catching slippery ideas. I like catching them, and so when I show you the ideas I caught, they're slippery. It's not because I'm trying to fool people. And the idea that after all these years, that you would think I'm playing a manipulation game, I'm obviously just putting up whatever ideas. I don't care if people think they're crazy. So like all living things have feelings. Ponage warning, and then later part of the video. Okay, yeah, I got a little ponage thing. Turns out you conceded in this video a point I've been arguing for years. Stay tuned in and see what I mean. You said the internet, is jackass, like the Jackass show. I thought that was really interesting and true what you were saying. I thought the stuff you were saying about reputation and your reputation as a DMCAer, which was not fair. The whole Holocaust denial thing didn't necessarily come out fair, but it's not like we've ever probed the limits. But obviously, you didn't lack compassion. You're not being a pro-Nazi denialist. It's just that you have some unconventional views on exactly what motivated it and how it happened, and I think how widespread it was. Maybe that I don't remember. Might be misremembering. And but still, it was very true what you said. Actually, this whole video was very true. It was an example of the reason that we could justify watching you. Um, but Gary, I've been pretty nice to you. We did meet in person. Got along fine. We would get along fine because I think we're an odd couple, but uh, we can handle. We have thick enough skins and so on to handle those differences online. It's not like we're neighbors. And you have to deal with it all the time, and things could get, this is this hobby of public discussion, and I think it can be productive. And you're complaining the internet's a jackass, but my default mode with you when you say something I think is ridiculous is not to jump down your throat and call you a liar, but it is yours, and so that sounds like, some show from Idiocracy, On My Balls or Jackass or whatever. Um, and this word thing is a perfect example. You could just say, well, what do you mean by locality? What do you mean by realism? You want to insult it as meaningless before you even find out enough about it, and then you resort to this ignoramus style argument, which I know is not honest, because you're no ignoramus, right? So you're doing it rhetorically, not necessarily consciously, because we all just follow a train of thought, and sometimes we don't look back and go, wait, that was a weird turn. But I see a weird turn from complaining about the world as a jackass and calling me being dishonest to you. I don't mind you call it stupid or whatever, but you say I'm just playing word games when it's really just you're being lazy. You don't want to learn other people's words, but you want us to learn your words, ton. And if I show a metaphor of what pilot wave means, just to edify us all on what pilot wave that means, that plays a role in these arguments, and it's fun and interesting and beneficial to learn these things that play a part. The theories, phlogiston or whatever, that didn't make it, that it's very useful to know about these certain kinds of ideas and metaphors, and you bitch about that. And yet, but not in a particularly bad way, but still you bitched about it. And yet you're talking about fish and stuff all the time. Your fish metaphors should be welcomed and understood with open arms. And in this video, one of the very interesting things you said, which again seems like influenced by me, frankly, is that knowledge is metaphor. To know what this pen's like that you've never seen, novel pen, you relate it to a pen you have seen, and to a pencil you've seen, and so forth. And you related that to a problem in consciousness, which I thought was very true, except for we kind of can. You went on to say how we can get empathy, but I think you did say that, but your original point about conscious being incomparable was, just poetically true, really, but not really true. We can do the same thing that we do with the pen with consciousness, because we have the first pen, that's our consciousness. And then you have to assume other consciousnesses are somehow similar, not fully alike in every respect, but similar, and you describe the differences, and that's the basic method. Now, usually in life we have more than one apple, more than one dog, more than one pen to create our abstraction from. The fact that we only have ourself is this case where there is a totally insufficient statistical sample to really have a good model of what selves are like in general, but it can be done, and for various reasons. And one of them, or maybe the original and only one, is empathy is built into the brain, right? The mirror neurons having an imagining pain when you see pain and reacting not like it's your own pain, and it certainly doesn't feel quite the same, but there's a deep anguish that can feel because of the emotion of it even worse. And, like in most people, maybe depending on who it is. And, but that's not fair. I mean, it's automatic in general. You have to have had experiences that harden you to it otherwise, because there are even neurons that automatically uh, do this empathy. And through this process of really trying to be empathetic and understand other people as they are, which I think to a large degree you do try to do, um, you can model all that. But, that's the whole Lakoff idea, is that all knowledge is metaphoric. So that's another thing you've called me a lying word game playing asshole about, that maybe you should just listen to what I was saying years ago. Since you never changed your mind, you must have thought this for years, right? Or maybe it just sunk in eventually. I liked what you had to say about provisional truths. And because this is where I agree with you, and I'm not, this Antikantavad nihilistic type. Notice Antikantavad, I'm not labeling you that you are a nihilist, but you have a nihilistic type of skeptical argument, this Jainism, as you hold it. And I agree with, I'm on Gary's side of this tug of war where, some people say that you have to choose sides. Sometimes you'll be wrong, but if you don't choose, you're always wrong. And I think that goes with just, you don't need to be violent about it, because, don't do anything that's going to turn out too bad if it turns out you were wrong, even if you're sure you're not. But anyway, on the Gary's side of the tug of war with the provisional truths thing, is that the distance of the sun is a real fact, that we exist, that a single consciousness exists without any acknowledgeable proof that anybody else would give, that the distance to the moon, the funny thing is he related a bunch of facts that are all measurements of relations between things. That's the funny thing. So relativism, this is an opportunity to asterisk relativism. My formulation, the correct one of relativism, is that stop thinking about no rules and the nihilistic kind of angle. That plays a role, but it's not centered on that. It's about relationships. It's about the facts that really exist outside you are things like distances between two objects, changes in temperature, changes in energy, not absolute energies, not absolute temperatures. Right? So it's changes, and some of the surreal things we've seen in physics, which we know is not common sense, it's been proved to not be common sense, are of this nature. And so you need to have a reasonable doubt, but there's also things that are beyond a reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt can be a moving threshold, right? Like if you are thinking about jumping across a gully or something, a drop to your death kind of gully. The reasonable doubt, like, you should only jump if beyond a reasonable doubt you can make it. Right? Like if it is unreasonable to even think that you could ever make it, then you shouldn't jump. And if it's kind of close, you probably shouldn't jump. If it's looks totally doable, but you can't quite be sure, you probably shouldn't jump. Unless you're running from zombies. In which case, if you barely think you can jump, it might be reasonable. And this is how reasonable doubt works as well. So, in other words, you can never absolutely be sure, right? And many of the things Antikantavad has brought up, you don't even, this is in the solipsis thing, you don't even have to, it's silly to have to be absolutely sure. Like, which direction should I call north? It doesn't matter. Call it north, nordi, norti, nuberdangle, something with an N though, if I please, because it'll be easier for me to remember. But the point is that relative to you, there is that direction is information in the real world. This is another thing, Gary, you have totally bad-mouthed and cussed me out about. even though I know you agree with me, but we might never get the language to communicate it, because that whole thing about when you're dead or if there's no consciousnesses in the universe, there's all these truths. Right, those are all the material facts, and the fact that they are there in this relativistic sense of the information is a set of relationships or facts about relationships, and that is the same thing as saying the universe is information, right? In other words, the old theory of information was all tied up in the brain and mind-body dualism, and information was like an ethereal Platonic thing. And this idea that it's outside in the world, even if there's no consciousness, is is the position that, what am I trying to say? That information is truly in the universe, right? And things are about something, like not that they're teleological, which is the human sense of purpose. They don't have a purpose, right? But they do have a matter of being. They do have a way that they are. They have relationships, right? However complicated they turn out to be. So when you were saying this, you were pointing out that you segued into consciousness, and this is where the Pone Edge comes in. You segue into consciousness, the human beings, that their value compared to a pencil, for example. Again, I'm on your side of the tug of war here, but does our friendship mean anything? No. Anyway, be that as it may, you said that people have had this feeling, it's existed, and something about 100,000 years, a million years, for fuck's sake, a billion years. And that's where you conceded to me. And I had to look it up on the internet to make sure, but I thought a billion years, ooh, that's a long time ago. You said creatures, or the creatures have had feelings, and worries and pains and stuff for a billion years. Oh, yeah, because a billion years ago, my friend, and this is some of the more solid science you got out there, the way they filled in the evolutionary tree, because in spite of what the young earth creationists say, a lot of these numbers they all web together, and they have so many samples of different things now, and especially the really ancient things, all those bacteria that got stuck in rocks and stuff. That's what there's the most fossils of anything. So some of the oldest stuff is what they know best. Ha. And a billion years ago, my friend, there was bacteria, archaea, eukaryotes, amoeba, which is like a eukaryote, and just a few kinds of plants. If you consider algae a plant, if you consider moss, which they are pretty plant-like. The algae seems iffy, but I think it counts. But as like a micro plant. But the moss, definitely plant. I love moss. It's better than a plant. But it's almost. But anyway, it's a it's a thing with feeling. So you agree with me about the paramecium, because that's all that there was a billion years ago on Earth. That's right. For 3 billion years, there was nothing but little bitty things, learning everything that's just now recapitulating itself like a fractal. And when you zoom into the fractal back into that past that still exists, because all those creatures, they didn't, some of our ancestors just stayed that way, and you go all the way down and you get feeling living things. And we agree. Because I know you wouldn't say a billion years and not mean a billion years. Obviously, you say a billion years ago creatures had feelings. That's your subtle way. Just like with that, knowledge is metaphor. Knowledge is analogy. You are secretly conceding to my points one after the other. Even your crazy scientific theory is just a reaction to our discussions. So don't be mean. What the hell is my mouse doing?